So with that, welcome,
Thank you,
Tushar.
Jack.
Yeah. So just wanted to start. Tell us a little bit about Flyhomes. What problem are you trying to solve, and how should we think about you?
Absolutely. Well, good evening and thanks for being here. It's nice to spend the time and evening with you folks. So, Flyhomes is transforming the way people buy homes. What we mean by that is if you're a first time home buyer, we would turn you into an all cash buyer. Being in the market that we're in here, that's important because the sellers are looking for certainty and speed of closing. And only a few people have cash, but most don't. So we level the playing field. We say we know the buyers. It gives you the best odds of being able to win the home you like at the best value possible. If you're looking to upsize or downsize, the problem today is that you have to sell your home first or put a contingent offer. That makes it very difficult. But we allow you to buy your next home while living in the comforts of your current home. So we call that a trade-up program. We've been operational in Seattle and are fairly sizable in Seattle. And Bay Area is trying to show the same trajectory as Seattle. So that's a little bit about us.
Okay, very cool. Sounds like you're, helping buyers out in competitive market with, like the Seattle Bay Area with innovative approaches.
Absolutely.
Cool. All right. So we'll get back to Flyhomes, but a little bit about you. Let's hear about, the main question I have is you spent time at McKinsey, you spent some time at Microsoft, and then you went the startup founder route. Tell us about a pivotal moment that kind of made you change and go that way.
So I had my career as a data scientist and used to work at Microsoft as a program manager for the core ranking algorithm behind Bing and a couple of other stints at Microsoft as well. I went back to then do my MBA at Kellogg, which we both share. And I was going to go to McKinsey. And honestly, I think unlike a lot of folks here, I actually hadn't thought about being an entrepreneur before I became one. The good news is that when you sort of step out of your current setting, which was Microsoft, and a very good environment, and I met my co-founder who was going to start a company, and we took a class project together. But it's one of those things where the moment I started doing it, it was just such a lot of fun, and we'll talk about sort of how we pivoted, and a big part of that is also how we were able to support ourselves in the beginning. It happened kind of by chance, but it's been 4 years now, and really glad that happened. And in many ways, I think it was being out of Microsoft and environment and being open to the opportunities.
Got it. Kind of being out of the corporate world, back at business school, meeting a like-minded co-founder.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Yeah. So one of the biggest fears founders have is around job stability and worrying about the next paycheck. Just a little bit about how you made that leap, from that mindset, and any insights for us.
So, one good news is that once you leave Microsoft and you're back in business school, there wasn't a whole lot of downside while at business school to go start something and try something. But having said that, I had a job at McKinsey. It was something that I went to business school for. I, at that point, had a 3-year-old daughter, and my wife works at the University of Washington in education. Financially, as a family, we were enough to support a cash flow, but it was certainly something that we had to sort of think about with a young kid at home. So I think I've met a lot of founders, and everybody's different. So this is just my experience. But for me, it was important to understand what's the downside and reconcile with that. So we had thankfully bought a home where we could rent the basement, which paid as an Airbnb, which actually paid the rent for the home, the mortgage for the home. And the school district was really nice, so we knew that our kid could go to a good school. And my wife and I talked about this, and we said we're totally okay with our current income for the next 2 years, let's say. So I think I would encourage founders to sort of think about what is it that you worry about from a financial perspective, reconcile with that, because once you've done that, then it's a lot easier to think about the upside and not have to worry about the finances. So we made a pretty active choice at that point and said, look, we could go to McKinsey, we could always go back to a corporate career, but this was an opportunity to go try something different. And once I started doing it, it was just so much fun, and also started seeing success, sort of one thing after the other, that since then we've never looked back.
Okay, sounds like you take a hard look at the downside, not too scary, and then start to use the real estate to your benefit early on. So.
That's right. Actually, I never thought when I bought my home that I would be selling homes or doing anything around that, but certainly helped.
Did the idea start with that basement?
Idea started actually in a different way. I was a machine learning scientist, so we were looking to start a company that saves energy in every house. But we quickly realized that people don't upgrade energy in the houses because the capital investment doesn't get recouped in time. And unfortunately, the housing market is opaque to the energy upgrades. So basically, people will, if you were to sell the house, nobody would pay you back for the energy upgrades that you put in. So that sort of made me question what are the other areas that the housing market is opaque to. Like how do you sort of price for different builders, quality of homes, road noise, view. So it's kind of a nail with a hammer situation. We need machine learning. So we're going to make the housing market more transparent. What happened was, in order to do that, we needed data. And for getting the data, my co-founder uses legal background, uses JD MBA to help us get the brokerage license, just so that we can have the access to the data. When we had the access to the data, and this kind of leads to the conversation here, we now actually had a brokerage just so that we can have the data, and we were building a machine learning company to make the home buying become more transparent. And once we had the access to the brokerage, we actually sold the first home to my ex-boss at Microsoft over a weekend and realized this was a great way to bootstrap and actually keep learning about what is it that the people actually care about. So, big part of the startup journey is that pivotal and learning.
Yeah.
And a lot of that is also sort of supporting yourself in the beginning as well.
Very cool. All right, so back to Flyhomes a little bit. So tell us a little bit about the ecosystem around Flyhomes. Who else is on this journey with you?
Absolutely. So as I said, the primary focus for us is the home buyers. My ex-boss at Microsoft was our first customer. He was a home buyer. That's how we got started. And since we had actually had no experience in this other than buying my own house, both Steve and I had bought our homes before, and we felt that to be a very painful experience. Our journey was always about how do we make this experience better for the home buyers. So as a part of that process, customers came first, and I would say that's always the big part of the ecosystem, because ultimately you're creating a solution for the customers, and you want to do the right thing by them. But as many of you might have bought a home or be thinking about this, home buying involves multiple parties, all the way from lenders, title and escrow, people, inspectors, contractors. So we certainly had to build a pretty good ecosystem around that. And the approach that we've taken is that we put the customer first and say, okay, what is it the customers need? Very early on, we start establishing what is it that for any partner to be with us in the ecosystem, what standard do they need to meet for the customers? And many of these services we've actually ended up developing ourselves in the company. So now we have a mortgage company, a title and escrow company, because we find that the level of service that the customers need, we can integrate all that in one platform. It becomes a lot more powerful. So we always take a fine approach between the ecosystem versus sort of doing the things in-house as well.
Okay, pretty cool. So you did a high level of integration, around mortgage, escrow, and lending as well.
That's right.
Yeah, very cool. Yeah, a little bit. Let's learn a little bit about our audience. See who's here from a customer profile. So, startup founders, founder aspirants, early stage startup employees. Okay, a lot of room. Looking to buy a home very soon, or in the market for one? Always looking. So you got a couple of customer persona too.
That's good.
All right. Yeah. So let's talk about MVP. It's how do you get that? Tell us about the traction that you try to get investors excited. So take us through some of those steps.
Absolutely. So as I said, that the company that we were building was a very different company than what we are today. But as we sold the first home, and as we sold a second and third home, it became clear to us that the home buying problem, transparency is one part of the solution.
Yeah.
But the whole process of how do you see a home to how do you sort of become competitive in the market, the transaction process is very broken. So as an industry, with Zillow and Redfin, you could sort of see that information of what homes are available on the market became transparent through the MLS integration. But how do you go through the transaction process? How do the sellers and buyers interact with each other? Nothing had changed around that. So we started pivoting and sort of got into that. The fortunate thing that happened for us, and not every entrepreneur here might have that opportunity, is that the business we were in, we could actually make a sizable amount of money in every transaction that we did. So we didn't wait for anything. We didn't wait for the perfect solution. we just kept doing one sale after the other. And in every sale that we did, we wanted to learn from that and improve it. So the attitude was do the best you can for the customer in front of you, but then go back and learn and say, how do we take something from here that could become scalable? And we didn't want to raise any funding till then because you have to be conscious before you raise the funds because you're bringing somebody else's money on and you need to know at least ballparkish what you want to bring it for. So we were fortunate that we had gotten to not the 1 million of net revenue, just doing what we were doing in a very quick succession. But at that point, we finally sort of had the aha moment of what the industry would look like next, which was that we realized that the sellers really valued certainty. And when we were helping home buyers, in order to give them the edge to be able to win more often, win at a better price, what if we turned them into guaranteed home buyers? So essentially, we told the sellers, look, we know who our buyers are. You don't need to worry about their financing. If they fail to buy the house, then we would step in and buy the house at the same value. Now, for this, as you can imagine, as two college students graduating from the MBA, we had no money to be able to buy the house if something failed. So it made sense for us at that point to go get the first round of funding. And even there, we weren't out there actively looking for funding, but we were talking to SoFi and other banks to figure out how can we enable this program. And as a part of the process, we met an angel investor. He's the founder of Blue Nile and Zulily, Mark Wadon. And he was like, I love what you guys are doing. I want to be a part of this. And we were like, wow, like Mark wants to be a part of this. So we took a step back and I think we were like, this could be real. And I think we do need the VC funding or the angel seed investment. So we raised $2 million from Mark at that point. And that was the first round of funding that we had raised officially. Before that, we had, other than making the money, while in MBA as well, we had some money that came in through MBA scholarships and other things like that, which again is something that I would encourage the founders to look at. There's always sources of money that you can get, like including AWS gave us a pretty sizable credit in the beginning. So I think things like that also matter a lot in the beginning.
Got it. So it was the idea, the cash offer idea that got the investors excited. Yeah.
So yeah, I think the first round was the guaranteed offer idea and then got the first investor from there.
Got it. Okay. Since you mentioned the bootstrapping, let's talk about that. Any more ideas for the audience around bootstrapping?
So I think the one thing that I've seen, particularly if you're in a consumer company, I think a lot of folks are looking to sort of wait for the perfect solution to go to the consumers. And at least it's been my experience that you should try to go sell your product as quickly as possible, even if it's just to a small set of consumers, because that's how you learn and that's how your product becomes what it actually evolves to, because there's just no way to know otherwise. I think it's also interesting. We certainly didn't have the wisdom when we got started, but I think in the hindsight, knowing that the economics of a business was good and then we can actually bootstrap and support ourselves was something that is empowering. So I think if I'm looking to sort of work with new entrepreneurs, questioning your business economics and how can you support yourself, I think is definitely a thing that you should think about.
All right, so let's dive into the financial model of Flyhomes. So from what I understand, you talked about seed funding, you talked about raising a Series A. Mm-hmm. And tell us about how you kind of combine that with a line of credit and how that you're able to leverage that.
Absolutely. So when we did a seed funding, we were doing this capital light model, which was that we would guarantee the purchase. So we weren't actually buying the house ourselves, but every time a buyer made an offer that we represented, we would add an addendum saying, if the buyer fails, we'll buy the house. The theory was that there would be very few such houses that we would be buying. But at some point, we realized that also was not ideal. The fundamental idea that the sellers and buyers should come to the transaction on the same day is broken because the sellers want the money as fast as possible, and the buyers want to be able to shop around the best rates and be able to get the money when they can. So we basically turned it around into a credit card swipe for real estate. So essentially, the idea of cash offer became where the sellers would get paid right away, the buyers would then be able to come back, shop, and then buy the house back from us. Now, as you could imagine, in order to do this now, we actually need a lot more capital to enable this. So we had to go for a combination of both venture capital as well as debt capital. So venture capital essentially was in order for us to build the operations of the company, and also in order to get the debt capital, you still need to have some level of capital inside the company because otherwise you would not be able to raise debt. So we raised $16 million from Andreessen Horowitz in a Series A. That was last year. But the thing is, $16 million plus a 218 that's not enough for us to be able to front and buy a lot of houses. So where do you get the rest of capital from? And this was quite interesting because we essentially ended up creating a whole new asset class, which is we are buying a house for a short time, which we have a buyer already committed who's going to buy the house back from us. So this financial product is backed by the house as a collateral, and it's a short-term collateral. Once we've done 10, 20, 50, 100 of these transactions, then we can show how reliable is this asset class and how can we sort of raise further against that.
So it looks like you raised a couple of double-digit millions for VC funding and then kind of triple-digit for line of credit.
That's right.
Yeah. Tell us about the scaling experience for your customers.
So I think part of the scaling was, as you can imagine, if we're out there promising that we can go do the cash offers for folks, we need to have the right capital partners to be able to do that. When you go into, it's very interesting, the venture capital, what comes with that and what comes with debt capital is very different. But with debt capital, there was a lot of regulation around, how much liquidity should we have as a company? How do we make sure that our financials are clear? How do we do this program in a way that's very systematic? And we started on something which was not perfect. So one of the suggestions I'll give is, you don't necessarily get the perfect financial setting right away, but start with something and keep iterating and sort of improving on that. And even to date, we continue to improve on the line of credit, which is fundamental to sort of scaling. So I would say there's two components of scaling. One is the fundamental product itself, which is the cash offer program, for which we needed the venture for the debt facility. But the second part of scaling is building an amazing team and company and growing in different markets. And that's something that you need the equity capital for, and that's what we used the venture money for.
So you talked about iteration. Tell us about some decisions you got right and some things you wish you had done differently.
The first, off late, the first house that we ended up, so we, in our trade-up product that we talk about, where if people have a house already and they're looking to upsize or downsize, we would allow them to do that. So essentially what we do is we would go and guarantee a price for you for your first home. So that based on that, we know what you're qualified to buy as your subsequent home. And now you can sit in your home. The day you find your home that you love, we will buy the next house for you. And then we will move you from this home to the next home, come back and list your home on the market, get you the best price possible. But if it doesn't sell, then we will buy the house within 3 months. And we're not looking to make the money of buying a house at a discount. So if we went back and sold it for a higher price, we'll give you all the money back. The only way we make money is through the same commissions that your traditional agents would charge you. Yeah. It just made us realize how idiosyncratic the housing and the assets are and what you need to do in terms of building capabilities to actually be able to price the house as well. Thankfully, since then, we haven't gotten stuck with a single house. But what we're doing is actually putting ourselves in the customer's shoes and taking a similar risk that the customers take. But the way we can actually do it much better is because with the power of data and technology and really investing in research and things and such as that. So I think just developing those systems is something that you kind of have to go and do as you build the company.
Got it. Okay. So with VC funding, you get that oversight and support, board membership, and tell us about what's different with the line of credit.
Yeah, I think so I guess just speaking on the VC funding side, I definitely would say that it's been incredible working with the board members from the venture world. Everybody has a different experience, but I've had a really positive experience with our board members. You find they just sit on so many boards and have got a lot of perspective. Mm-hmm. Of course, you have to build the company that you're building and drive that, but it's helpful to sort of see the different perspectives, and particularly as we've gone ahead and raised these different ways of funding, such as the line of credit. And I can also talk about venture debt, which is something that a lot of people sort of think about. And a lot of those ideas came from our board members as well in the introductions. So equity capital is somebody's a partner with you in this journey. You don't have to pay the equity capital back typically. So they have invested in you and taken a part of the company. In venture debt, it's the debt, right? So, or even the line of credit is the debt, so we are obligated to pay it back. So there's less of the oversight, less of strategic direction. We've had good partners who are looking ahead with us and say, how do we increase the buy box and continue to sort of qualify different kinds of properties and make, like we used to start only with the whole buy side product, but now we're going to support the trader product as well. So those are things we're excited about.
Awesome. So there's a question here from the audience around competition. It's a question about how does Flyhomes compete with others, like Zillow, who's also based in Seattle.
So Seattle, in many ways, was a very interesting place for real estate innovation. Redfin and Zillow both started that. Zillow is, and now there's a lot going on in terms of changing real estate right now, but traditionally Zillow was an information engine. So essentially you went in and searched for houses, and then they referred you to an agent. Flyhomes is an end-to-end platform for buying houses, along with the integrated service. So we do everything for you that your real estate agent would do for you, with some superpowers, essentially, right? So that's something that is totally different from how Zillow was. And Redfin was an end-to-end brokerage, but was not quite into sort of the cash offer and transactional process in the same way that we were. So we find that we had a pretty good niche in the market, a problem that we saw, and we are solving for it. Real estate industry is a really interesting times at the moment. Lots has changed, where Zillow is now going into principal play to be able to buy the houses themselves, but they're focusing on much more on the sellers. So if you want to sell your house fast, Zillow will come and make a cash offer to you and buy the house from you directly. Yeah. That's a big change that's happening. Open Door is a company based in the Bay Area which does the same thing. We focus on buyers, so that's sort of the big difference for us. So we are here making every buyer be able to become a cash buyer, give them the best odds of buying the house at the best value possible. So that's where we are, I think, uniquely different, and also the markets we're operating in. Because we focus on the buyers, we're operating in a lot more sort of sellers markets where the buyers problems exist. So all of West Coast, East Coast is where it's going to be interesting for us to begin with.
We were talking earlier, you were talking about the different kind of oversight that a line of credit brings. Mm-hmm. You comment on that?
So we just finished our audited financials, for instance, and at the startup, many of these things you're still developing the systems across everything. So, as a part of the line of credit, you need to have audited financials. There's covenants, there's warrants in the deal. So you have to be very thoughtful and mindful of what you want to take as a line of credit. The legal work involved is far more complex than what it is to raise venture funds, which is relatively straightforward. So, it's a debt facility, and there's just a lot more regulation around that. But for the first time when you do it, you got to learn a lot. But I think eventually you sort of have a playbook, and then you can kind of keep replicating it from there.
Got it. So in terms of alternatives to VC funding, we talked about bootstrapping so far. We talked about venture debt. We talked about line of credit. Anything else you want to talk to the audience about?
I can talk a little bit more about venture debt. I don't know. How many of you folks have heard of venture debt here or have taken it for your enterprises? So I think this, again, debt has connotations to begin with. Now, we are very different in the sense that we have a line of credit or we take a venture debt because we need quite a bit of money to be able to turn every buyer into a cash buyer. We need to put 10% in every house that we are buying. So we need some money for being able to go do that. So we just need more capital, essentially. So the venture capital comes at a very high stake of equity, versus venture debt, the equity stakes are very low. And line of credit, again, you're not putting your own equity out. So I think equity is an extremely priced resource for startups. And for us, burn is not that high, so we don't necessarily want to go burn all the equity. So we can afford to take a debt to just get ourselves more liquidity to be able to do what we're doing. So I think one of the important considerations that one needs to have as you think of different financing strategies is what do you need the money for, right? So that's the first question you got to ask yourself. If you need the money to support the operations and burn it, venture debt is not a bad way to sort of extend your runway, but then also you have a debt that you have to go pay back and then has more covenants versus equity, right? So something you have to be very thoughtful about. For us, we just need more liquidity and have more money on our balance sheet to be able to go do the cash offers and things that we are doing. So venture debt made a lot of sense because it cuts the cost. We just don't have to give that much equity for getting this more liquidity.
Thanks for that. I think there's a question on what is venture debt as opposed to regular debt. Yeah.
That's a good question, actually. It's hard to describe it exactly, but I think venture debt is more comfortable in working between the regular debt's risk thresholds versus venture equity. risk threshold. So I think a good way to think about this is every person you go to raise money from, you have to understand who are the funders behind that group. So, and what are the expected return of investment that they're hoping for, right? So even within the debt providers, there's multiple layers of companies. Some where they're expecting us, like big banks, expect a lot less return of investment compared to middle tier investments because they're investing in more risky assets. So as we talked about even doing a cash offer, we had to go in and get somebody first who was willing to take more risk of an unidentified product.
Yeah.
And then once we have proven the risk out, then we could go to a bigger bank. So venture debt, I think, on the debt spectrum is just somewhere in the middle of equity as venture risk that the equity invest capital takes versus what the regular debt partners would take is kind of how I think about it. Typically, a lot of companies would raise a series equity round and would do venture debt as a part of that in order to extend their runway. And for us, that kind of made sense as a part of liquidity as well.
Got it. Cool. Thanks for that. So when we prepared for this talk, you talked about having a growth plan in mind before you raise.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk to us a little bit about what that plan looks like?
I guess as I said, like in general, although there are different schools of thought, sometimes you want to raise when you don't necessarily need the money at the same time, because when you absolutely need the money, your leverage changes. But having said that, every time you raise money, you should have a strategy of how you're going to use that money. So, for instance, the stage we're at the moment, the next steps of Flyhomes at the moment are that we want to take our trade-up program and truly operationalize it. As you can imagine, that we would be guaranteeing so many houses on the sell side. We want to make sure that we have enough capital to be able to go do that. We have now replicated our Seattle success into California and the Bay Area, but there's lots of other markets that we want to go to. So how do you sort of go do that? We started our own mortgage company, title and escrow company. How do we sort of integrate that across all markets and build something spectacular and take a tech experience to the next level? So if you think of those sort of high-level priorities, you say, this is what we want to go do, this is where we want to be from a net run rate perspective, and then you work backwards and say, what is it going to take to get there, from a workforce perspective, from an investment in growth and marketing and top of the funnel. So I think you have to work your plan backwards. Not everything is going to go according to the plan. Normally things change quite a bit, but if you have the rough contours, that's what's needed as the funders are looking to come and invest in you. Even the debt partners would typically look for a venture capital style pitch decks because they want to understand what company they're working with. So I think having a clear idea of what the growth investment would be is important. And you can then say, do you want to raise for 3 years runway or 2 years runway? That's a call that each founder makes based on the different companies they're in.
So we're at a time when there's abundance of venture capital. It seems it's like $100 billion from what I heard. Back at 2000 levels. Is this the right time to think about alternatives to VC? Is that the right way to think about it?
So I guess the first way to think about this is you need to understand what is it that you and your company actually needs, right? So I think before even getting carried away with what's going on in the external environment, it's really important to get a sense of what is it that you need in your own company. Having said that, venture capital is definitely at an all-time high. It's a very fluid environment at the moment. But venture capital has a certain return of investment that's expected of venture capital, which, in many cases, we've raised venture capital. I'm supportive of venture capital because if you want to build a company that's going to grow really fast, it's not just the money, but also the expertise and subsequent sort of things that come with it, I think, are all useful. But having said that, venture capital might not be the right thing for every company. So if you're not looking to grow at a very fast pace, or you have a more stable company that you want to go do, then venture capital might not be the right thing for you. And no matter how the fluid the environment is, the cost of venture capital is not going to be as low as some of the debt capital or the providers, just because the LPs there just expect a totally different return as such.
Yeah. There's a question from the audience around what are some of the financial realities founders should account for when weighing which financial funding route to take. And it sounds like you answered some of that, which is around the cost implication. Yeah, both of them come at a different cost, and different types of oversight is another. Any others?
That's right. And third is, of course, there's a difference between debt and equity. The reason the venture capital is so expensive is because is more risky, right? So they are willing to be a part of this company, and if you fail, then the investment will also fail. So I think in that sense, taking a debt brings more risk as a founder versus taking on venture capital in that sense is less dangerous as a founder.
Got it. Okay. So maybe I'll turn it over to the audience for a couple of questions, and I have a couple to finish up with. You, sir.
So the question is that the model that we have around making every buyer a cash buyer, why can't big companies with big balance sheets go do this? So why wouldn't Google go do this? And the second question, I guess, is what is the moat based on that in terms of how do we think about defensibility ourselves, right? So I guess it's true that when we came up with the idea of the cash offers and turning every buyer into a cash offer, it felt amazingly simple, So it was like, but it took us about a couple of years to come up with that idea of being in the market instead of doing a deal after deal. And when we got to it, we were always surprised, and still are, that why was this not done before? Why wasn't this something that was commonplace? And I think in many ways is something that will become the norm of the market going forward. I do believe that every offer, every transaction will be a cash transaction, and that's how the home buyings will be done. Now, I don't know if Google would do it or not. Even if they did it, they would do it only for the Google employees. Our product would work across the board. So if you're a firefighter, you are a school teacher, or you are a Google employee, you have 5% or 50% down. It doesn't matter as long as you're qualified to get a loan, we can turn you into a cash buyer and level the playing field. So in that sense, the finance part of it, I think, is still interesting. It's not just one company, but we're going to enable that across the board for everybody. Now, the second question is sort of what's the moat? As I said, I do believe that eventually everybody would be a cash buyer. And if it is only a financial play, then it will become simply who can come up with the balance sheet and create the solution. But Flyhomes, we're not just a financial play. We are actually, we do everything that your broker would do for you. So we are a technology platform. We are a human service element of the home buying. And home buying is complex. It has everything from showing the home to working with the buyers, to helping them counsel and mentor, having technology and platforms that track everything. So I definitely believe that it's a combination of great human service, technology, and capital, and working all three in tandem together is what creates a winning company in this sector.
So to add to that, maybe you can talk a little bit about the team at Flyhomes.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So as a team, big part of home buying is the team. And one interesting thing that I'll sort of note here also is that we've fundamentally aligned our interests with that of the customers. So if you think of traditional home buying model, the agent's interests are not necessarily fully aligned with the home buyers, but because we are fronting the capital or cash, we actually have to make sure that the house is a good house, because if the buyers walk away, even though there's some level of earnest money involved, we have the same risk of actually holding the house ourselves. So as a function, we've taken an approach which is an expertise-based approach. So traditionally, you work with an agent and they do everything for you. But we believe that to take this experience to the next level, it's a combination of multiple skills that you need. So we have a field team where you can see the house within, you just book on the app and you can see the house at any point you want at your convenience. You don't have to work around the schedules of the other folks. We have a research and pricing team which goes really deep and prices every single home. So what we've done is we've taken the job of a realtor and said, how do we break it into small pieces and do it as an expertise? Of course, both with the expert teams sort of doing their job, but then also bringing technology and processes to take the experience to the next level.
There's a question here about, you went down the line of credit with VC funding route. Would you take VC funds again? And I think you answered some of that with your trade-up goals, but maybe you can do a quick summary.
Yeah, that's a great question. So the path and journey that we are on, we believe is a very big problem to go solve. We are only, getting started in Seattle and Bay Area. So with the growth that we want to go have, to build a team. So our team has, we have a sizable engineering team. We have, each market will have a general manager for the market, and we have the expertise team in each of these areas. Yeah. As we launch new markets, new products, as we launch completely new businesses such as title, escrow, other things, we need to be able to scale that. And for that, we would raise the VC funds. For our capital needs for the products that we are creating, we'll continue to raise different debt facilities and always have a balance of the two.
Got it. Here's a big picture question for you. is there an upper limit to the amount of capital you can raise? At a national level, the amount of capital needed would be astronomical.
the So the thing is, that's a great question. I haven't thought of it in that way, but my presumption is the more and more we raise and the more and more products that we do as cash offers, we would establish that this is a very good financial product. And banks are already giving that capital for the consumers to loan against their house. So that much capital is sort of flowing around in the world already as a loan to the consumers. This is a short-term loan against the same collateral, which is your house. So I don't believe that that'll be the upper limit that we would hit.
How would you apply these alternative VC models to kind of a traditional IoT kind of widgets? More, I guess. What do you think about a startup or a software company?
I think the venture debt model. I think venture debt is as more of a play that's becoming more and more standard with the VC funding, where you're just looking to extend your runway and you want to have some more capital. The debt financing part of it, I think, is interesting, actually. And in all honesty, I would not know exactly sort of how it would apply in your specific business context, but I'm happy to sort of discuss that and sort of explore what that might look like. But it's not exactly clear to me what that would look like.
Okay, cool. There's a Seattle versus Bay Area question. Did you find it harder to start your company out of Seattle as opposed to the Bay Area?
We got naturally started in Seattle. I'm a former Microsoftie. So I used to be in Seattle. That was the first state that gave us the license. California licensing is a lot longer process, which was slower, but then once you get it, I think thankfully you're enabled for the whole state. But having said that, launching from Seattle, coming to the Bay Area, we found that our model is actually working even better in Bay Area, and customers really like it. So I think from that perspective, Bay Area has seen a lot more adoption much faster than Seattle. But geographical realities here, because we're not just making the cash offer, but doing everything from sort of home tours to all other elements of that. That operational complexity is higher in the Bay Area. Nobody likes the traffic here, of course. So I think it's just been from an operational perspective, it's been a bit challenging, but we've sort of stabilized now as a team and continue to grow from there.
So we're getting close to the end. Some inspiration for the founders or aspiring founders in the room, which is around the financial burden of starting up can be stressful. How do you remain positive and continue to stay the course?
Yeah, I think it kind of goes back to the beginning, which is, first of all, you have to do the startup for the right reasons and understand that invariably the best case outcome might not happen. And despite, we are at a good trajectory at the moment as a company, but even then, your capital is tied up into your equity. So for you to sort of continue going, you have to truly enjoy what you're doing. That's number one. But having said that, I think you also want to make sure that you have got your bases covered. So for instance, as we said, like we had an Airbnb in our house. So how do you sort of, do some alternate ways of funding, or if your spouse is working, having that clear communication up front is critical. So I think for me, having found sort of what works for us and stabilizing at that level is critical, and then you can sort of shoot for the upside. And if you're enjoying what you're doing, then it becomes a lot easier.
Got it. Any words of inspiration for the prospective home buyers in the audience? That's outlook for the future.
Everybody asks me, since I've started in this industry, what's going to happen to the housing market in the future? And I think the answer is I don't know. It's fascinating. Every time we made a prediction, in fact, people much more close to the data have made predictions than us. It's always sort of gone many times the same way, many times the opposite way. It's just a total random chance. Having said that, the interest rates just came down, which is interesting from a trader perspective. So if you already have a house and you're looking to lock in a bigger house for yourself, the current rates are pretty low. So I think that is an opportunity to be able to go buy the next home. The other thing I would say, there's a lot of models around this at the moment as well, where we think of home buying, we think of home as an asset which basically can tie you down. But for me, it actually enabled me to become an entrepreneur because first the house values went up a lot, which was always nice to know. But then also we were able to Airbnb and use part of the income. So homes today could become assets which could actually support you. So I think thinking through what that is and buying a house that you could either rent or sell and are not super tied to it and yet be able to actually have something to start with, I think it's pretty powerful as well. So I would think about it on those lines as well.
Got it. Just want to get one more question. Is it wise to get funding from multiple sources at the same time? So VC, loans, private equity. So I know you talked a little bit, but was it sequential or at the same time?
So for us, it was sequential, and we did it over the need of what the business needed, and that's what we were going to go do. But it is interesting that as we are doing the venture debt with our debt facilities, you have to define sort of who has right over what part of the company. So I think you definitely have to define sort of the firewalls between the different sources. So as you sort of build these things, it's really important to think about if you're getting funding from any one source, what could that look like in terms of cutting out the other sources of funding? So defining the right level of boundaries and firewalls around each of these fundings, I think, is critical. And I would suggest thinking through that carefully, and as you sort of build on that.
Got it. There's a question about risks in these business, and how would you address them?
So this is one of the things that I've sort of reflected on a lot as a founder, is this idea of that fear is very different than the risk. So I find that most of our decisions are made on fear, and risk and fear are sometimes not correlated. So I think if you think of fundamentally the idea of cash offer, the reason the sellers choose the cash offers over perfectly well qualified finance buyers is because they can't afford to take the risk, or in their mind the fear is so high of something failing and the house will come back on the market and it could be all kinds of problems. But we as a company can assess what is the risk of each buyer. So what I would say here is that while it looks like we might be taking risk, I want to optimize for risk and reduce it all the time. So we do several things to do that. For instance, we underwrite each buyer to make sure that they will not fail, right? And we do that till the last mile, so there's no reason to have surprises there. So the beauty of us doing this is that at a company scale, we can actually find all reasons why the things would fail, and we can build scalable processes to eliminate those risks. And consequently, the risk becomes a lot lesser, and thereby we can sort of, actually take that risk, if you will, and make the industry a lot more robust and easy for everybody else involved.
We have time for one more question. I'll end it with a pragmatic one. For a first-time founder, how did you get warm intros to seed investors?
So I think this is a interesting one. I think they say, I was reading somewhere, if you ask for advice, if you ask for money, you get advice. If you ask for advice, you get the money, right? So in many ways, for us, we were literally trying to go solve a problem, right? So we were meeting a lot of people saying, how do we solve this problem? How can we become a guaranteed offer? And that's where we met a couple of investors, and actually a couple of angel investors. They were both founders, serial founders. They were like, we love what you're doing. We want to be a part of that. And I think that turned out to be a really good thing for us. And once we got really good seed investors involved, that led to really good introductions in the Series A, which again helped. And again, we did that at a time when we didn't really necessarily need the money. So I think one of the suggestions I would give is that be out there, meet people, ask for advice. Don't necessarily expect the money there, but if you're doing the right things, money would follow.
Oh, thanks for advice. So I think we're out of time. I wanted to thank you. It was a great chat.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, everyone.